Welcome to the February 2022 CIECAST, Information Privacy and the Impacts to the Collision Industry and Customers. I'm Paul Berry, Executive Director for CIECA. The Collision Industry Electronic Commerce Association, or CIECA, develops and promotes electronic communication standards that allow the collision industry to be more efficient. We also provide webinars like this one to help educate both members and non-members on trends that impact systems, processes, and the exchange of data across the industry. Today's presenters are Brandon Lour, Vice President of Business Development for CCi Global Technologies, and Steve Driz, Chief Information Security Officer for CCi Global Technologies. As we start the webinar, I want to remind you that there is no verbal communication between the participants and the presenter. If you have questions during the webinar, please type them in the questions panel on the webinar screen. We will answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. And now I'll turn the program over to Brandon.
Thank you, Paul. Can you hear me okay?
Hear you fine, thanks.
Fantastic. So thank you for the opportunity for allowing us to speak here today on the CIECA webcast. So my name is Brandon Lour. I'm Vice President of Client Experience and Business Development at CCi Global Technologies. I'm also an owner of the organization. I've been with the organization for 12 years now at CCi. Started right out of school, had my BA in Marketing and Behavioral Studies, and been with the company for 12 years, which has allowed me to have various positions as we started with 3 people at a small office in Stony Creek, Ontario, and have grown close to 40 now and expanding our global reach. So it's allowed me to go from our support department to development to focusing on account management, industry relations, and have just developed such a passion for the auto claims economy as we have kind of coined it and the rest of the industry has, because of the great people here, the collaboration, and organizations such as CIECA. And I know I've been involved before, had the opportunity to present, but we wanted to go a little bit deeper this time in our presentation with privacy and data security. So I want to introduce everybody to our Chief Information Security Officer, Steve Driz. He's part of our team and has joined our C-suite recently in the last year to focus on data protection and security. And Steve, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself, sir.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, I appreciate it. My name is Steve Driz. I'm, like Brandon mentioned, I'm the CISO at CCi. I work with Brandon and all our colleagues. It's a great team. Very proud and happy to be there. I have over 25 years of experience working with different levels in different industries and different levels of management on trying to bridge business and technology. So given basic understanding of what it is and it isn't, dissecting and solving complex business problems, I hold 2 designations. One is Canadian, which is ISP, and ITCP that are generally issued by the Canadian Information Processing Society. And all it means really is that I can testify in court on cybersecurity and IT related issues. So, and it will be accepted as true and the only true. And what we do is, CCi is such an interesting organization. Like Brendan said, it grew from 3 people to now we or close to over almost 40 people. And so it's no longer a startup, and it faces a lot of different challenges on a day-to-day basis that my role is to try and solve it and help the organization grow.
Excellent, thanks, Steve. And you gave a little bit of an introduction. And while we're not going to focus on CCi, I figured we would do a quick introduction of the organization for those who might not know who we are. We were formerly known as Claims Corp, and we pivoted our business through a digital transformation in 2018, which started with the rebranding to CCi Global Technologies, as we pivoted from a more management consulting organization that leveraged technology to drive performance improvement to focusing completely on a SaaS model and being that organization that can be a platform enabler or a business intelligence reporting organization. So our vision is to be the most trusted source for data aggregation, analytics, and performance improvement for the valued stakeholders in the auto claims economy. And since we started with our two original founders, Sam Malatesta and Tim Wilder, we always chose our clients very carefully and who we worked with. And that's why we say valued stakeholders in the auto claims economy. And that's what we see in this organization as well with CIECA and everything that they drive towards and how we leverage their standards in order to ensure that we're holding our own in the market as one of the trusted source providers when working with something as crucial as data and data privacy. We have our head office in Hamilton, Ontario, with regional locations in Stoney Creek, Ontario, Vancouver, BC, and just starting our European venture over in Milton Keynes with our partners over there in ITAS. Our digital product suite is secure data interfacing, solution integration, business intelligence, and tailored software solutions. And as we mentioned, our team continues to grow as our expansion moves on. But we continue to work with more stakeholders in this industry that are part of CIECA, and hopefully a lot of organizations will recognize our brand and attest to us being the most trusted source and what we want to work towards. But what are we here to talk about today? It's not so much CCi, but to share best practices about information privacy and industry impact. It is a crucial topic right now, as we know data is so important and so crucial to our business, as COVID has proven that we can't necessarily connect all the time. So having connected solutions has been so important. But on the tail end of that, we have to remember cybersecurity and what the impact is on the automotive value chain impact. And what I mean by that is there are so many different SaaS organizations and industry stakeholders sharing data right now that if one of us drops the ball, we all drop the ball. And that really comes from the evolution of body shops to collision centers as well. We try to be the trusted industry, and sometimes we're looked as a dirty industry or one that's not as sophisticated, but we've seen the industry grow and develop into this sophisticated collision ecosystem from all of us doing our part to repair vehicles properly. And we need to carry that onwards in ensuring we're doing that with data security and making sure we're protecting data. So first off, what is cybersecurity? And this has been a big focus of not only CIECA, but the industry. And if we wanted to look at a textbook definition before I turn it over to the expert, Steve, is cybersecurity is the application of technologies, processes, and controls to protect systems, networks, programs, devices, and data from cyber attacks. It aims to reduce the risk of cyber attacks and protect against unauthorized exploitation of systems, networks, and technologies. But maybe, Steve, you can give more of a broader definition and what it means to you and how you've developed your career around data security and cybersecurity for organizations and then coming on board with CCi.
Yeah, well, since inception, and I started focusing on cybersecurity related risks early on in just the beginning of the 90s, when just even before the internet came about and became a thing, there was a Usenet. There was a Usenet, and it's connected a number of university networks, and you could share information on Usenet similar to what we do on the internet today, but in a text-based kind of way. And even then, we started having a lot of issues whereby, you know, first issue that we've looked at was piracy. Software piracy, meaning that people would take software and try to upload it onto Usenet for others to download free of charge, which was a great vehicle for some companies, including Microsoft, to distribute their software to so many people around the globe. So it was good and bad. And when it became apparent that it's not going to be easy, is when we started seeing things like, you know, stolen credit cards being sold online, as an example, or traded online, or posted online. And that predates internet, it predates modern browsers where you can go and just browse a page and then buy products and services online. So we started paying attention to it and started paying attention more to access control. I mean, who has access to what, and why would they have access to certain things they're not supposed to? But it was at the time, the subject was widely misunderstood, and people were like, well, okay, we have all these connectors, we have all the infrastructure in place. Why would we limit, right? It's a democracy. We can do whatever we want. And so that led to a lot of confusion within the industry. And when we started accessing modern browsers and search engines came about, it just became worse and worse and worse pretty much every year. And no one knew what to do about it because we all were very liberal and we're saying it's freedom of this, and you can share information you decide to share on pretty much any platform. So today, cybersecurity is a discipline. It's a science project, if you will, and comprised of many different components. I'm not going to bore you with any technicalities, unless like we said, if you have a question, feel free to ask it in the chat. We'll respond to it. But essentially, cybersecurity has become, and it is a good textbook definition. It's protecting our infrastructure and protecting data that we don't own, in a sense, but it's someone else's data, someone's private information that is being now used as currency. So if you take a quick step back and you look at what was happening within the IT industry and IT risks that we knew even at the beginning of 2000s, and you look at it now, you'll see a different picture, because no one really knew like what we're going to protect and why to protect it, and because there were a lot of hacktivists, if you know what the term is. If not, people were hacking for fun. So they were breaking systems and breaking into systems for fun, just to prove that they can. Today, it's no longer the case, because all the information that is being accessed by unauthorized people is being stolen and is being sold. And these groups today, it's massive groups of people that generate very good amount of money from doing that, from cybercrime. So when you think about information that you have and you're saying, well, who needs that? A lot of people do, because they know what to do with it to make a profit. And a quick one. So that's pretty much what I wanted to add to what Brandon already said. And the landscape changes, so the cyber attacks are getting, of course, more and more sophisticated every day. So we pretty much, it's a cat and mouse game, right? So cyber criminals come up with new ways of doing things, but we're trying to be proactive, and we're trying to use modern technologies to sort of safeguard the information. But in reality, and I don't want to jump ahead, Brendan, but you can stop me anytime. But in reality, I mean, it doesn't really boil down to software and technologies alone. It boils down to people and processes. So to give you an example, if you're not aware of a threat, how can you protect against it? So awareness is being aware and understanding what's going on, and understanding that we're all being targeted. And it's not a matter of if anymore, it's a matter of when an attack will be successful. It's key to our success. Jointly we can do it, but we need to really understand what it's all about, and we really need to train ourselves and our employees to understand that as well.
That's a good point, Steve. And one of the things that we've always spoken about between Steve, myself, and the rest of the organization is cybersecurity and data protection is really starting to become like a health and safety policy, or what you do when a fire happens. So we know breaches are going to happen, and there's no way we can be 100% protected, but we can understand what to do prior to prevent it and what to do after, just like you would when there's a fire drill. And that's one of the things we'll get into a little bit later. But let's discuss some of the key components of what we want to go through today that are involved in cybersecurity, that are the major components. And one would be data, which is the information that's translated into a form that is efficient for movement or processing, which a ton of different organizations are producing tons of data every day, more data than we know what to do with. More importantly, more data than we might know how to properly protect. And us as an industry need to start to set what the thresholds are going to be for how we're going to protect all of these data. And that really starts with policies and putting policies in place to figure out what we need to do in order to protect it. But as Steve will go on in detail a little bit later, you can have all the policies you want in place and protective measures. If your people don't follow it, it's indifferent. It doesn't matter that you have those policies in place. And one of the breaches that we're going to walk through that occurred in a business that's relevant to the automotive ecosystem, it came down to people just not following a process and doing a security update. And those two components go right into the next part of cybersecurity and what you do to protect your organization. And if we look at 2021, what were some of the trends as we shifted to a more remote and workforce that was working from home? We started to see that working remotely was increasing exposure because we didn't really have the protection at home that we did within our offices. And that's what would lead to authentication abuse and people starting to steal our credentials and gain access to different programs or services just through knowing our usernames and passwords, and then starting to export data from using those credentials. We then saw insider attacks where we'd have people leaving back doors open in order for them to come in at a later date or another organization. Ransomware is huge within this industry right now. There's a ton of collision centers that have been impacted by this, by being frozen out of their own systems where they would have to pay in order to get access back to those systems, which is just a complete shutdown to any business. But just the collision industry being hit by that, it affects all stakeholders within the industry because we're all affected by that one person being locked out, which would lead to the supply chain attacks and seeing logistics companies being frozen and delivery of parts maybe not being able to get there or product for vehicles because there was some sort of exposure or data security issue going on. And I'm going to skip zero trust because I'd like Steve to go into a little bit more detail of what that means from a technical perspective. But essentially it means what the two words are. You don't trust everybody within your organization. Nobody should have godlike powers where they have access to all data tables or all information pieces, because then if they're compromised, the whole system is compromised. And that's where we really start to look for having that XDR in place and extended detection response. And Steve, maybe you can go into a little bit of detail about that. We spoke about that in not only Vegas, but the last CIECA meeting and what that looks like. Can you maybe share what extended detection response is?
Yeah, so I want to start with, you raised an interesting point with ransomware first, if you don't mind, just quickly.
Go ahead, Steve.
And, you know, people look at ransomware today as, you know, someone downloads a file and then my system is now encrypted, meaning that I cannot access those files and I need to pay someone, right? So the notion is I have to pay someone to send me the key to open the vault and get my data back, right? And it's unfortunately, it's no longer the case. The attacks get more sophisticated. And so what cyber criminals started doing quite recently is they get into the system and they take and make a copy of your data. They make a copy of your data. They basically take it with them. And once they take it with them, they send you a nice email saying, here's a sample of your data. They don't have to encrypt anything. They don't need to use any software. They say, we got data, you know, pay us, or we're going to publish it or sell it. So it's a new way of so-called ransomware. And so when it comes to zero trust and XDR, essentially you're looking at, like, we have a lot of instances where, and I'm sure that you have it in your businesses and we have it in our business or had it in the past, whereby one person is given godlike privileges on the system and they're able to access anything they want, pretty much, right? So it's called administrative access, right, or super user access. And in the past, that was not monitored, meaning that if I went ahead, as an example, if I have such privileges, and I can go and access any database I want and download any file I want, I could do that without any consequences. And it could be, there are two main concerns with that. One is malicious intent, right? So what if I don't know, I'm not happy about my tenure within the organization, or not happy about employees, or anything else, and I decide to cause harm and or sell that information to a competitor. And second is, what if I just didn't know? I downloaded, I was sitting at home and I downloaded a file from that Brandon posted somewhere that contains some trade secrets of CCI and other organizations, and or data. And I left it on my computer, and my child goes on my computer to play a game and accidentally exposes that file to the world, which had happened many times, and it's happening every day. So that's what you have to look for, and you also have to monitor. So it's not that, you know, trusting someone to come into your network is very short-sighted, because what happens is, and I think Brendan, you touched on that briefly. People, I think over 50% of all attacks today are phishing attacks, email phishing attacks. What it means is that you receive an email asking you to click a link and provide your user ID and password, okay? And it looks very legitimate. So these emails look very, very legitimate. They look like they came from Microsoft, or they came from Google, or they even came from Yahoo or Netflix or your bank. And all cyber criminals are looking for, again, you have to understand another thing is that vast majority of attacks are not initiated by people. It's not like someone sits, like someone like me or someone else sits at their computer and attacks you. It's not done that way, because it would be time consuming and resource consuming. It's done by bots. It's done by robots, by software, by programs, right? That come and do that. And once the successful attack happens and I get the credentials, then at some point humans are brought into the game, and they do what they do. So relying on intuition and relying on, you know, doing more of a social engineering and so on to get your organization to either pay someone or that you're not intended to pay, but they will make sure that they understand, you know, your supply chain, they understand who you work with, and they will do whatever is necessary to get the money. And I can give you examples if we have time later on. But so all I'm trying to say to get to the XDR is that everything needs to be monitored. So we need to understand if someone downloads a file, why they do it, or is it intended? Are they intend to do that, or is the job function they perform grants them to do that? So we need to be very, very granular and implementing zero trust, meaning that, you know, we know that even if I'm on the network and it seems like it's me, it could be a malicious or a rogue actor instead of me. So everything needs to be correlated and needs to be analyzed. But again, I'm a firm believer in not just enforceable policies, but I'm a firm believer that if you don't understand the threat, or you don't know of the threat, you cannot protect against that threat. So if you don't understand that, you know, some messages are malicious and you're just doing your job and you're just clicking on links and you're just clicking on attachments, you're gonna get caught. And it's the consequences, you know, it doesn't matter how big or small you are, because we look at different dashboard and attack path and where they're coming from and where they're going. We have those capabilities, and we see that it doesn't really matter if it's an enterprise, like a very large enterprise, multi-billion-dollar company, or a small shop that, you know, makes, you know, with 4 people in it, 4 employees, or maybe even less, because they're not going for the size, they're going for the data. And that's what they care about, right? They don't care about how big you are, how small you are, and do you or you don't have the ability to pay. And like Brandon mentioned, we can walk you through some interesting examples of how these things happen to give you just a little bit more tools to do better and do a better job protecting your critical infrastructure and your data.
Those are good points, Steve. And just go to one really simplistic example that is quite common, and you hear about it all the time on the news, is people getting scammed out of money via emails and other forms of communication. But these levels of fraud and attacks are getting so sophisticated to the point where a very simple example from the previous week is one organization we worked with had 4 new employees start, and each of those employees received an email from the CEO of the organization asking to have an immediate task done and to reach out to a number, and it looked like it was the CEO's phone number. And of course, these being new employees were thinking, yeah, of course, I got to reach out to this person. And it looked like the CEO was looking to get Apple gift cards sent for a meeting. And of course, these new people would think, yeah, absolutely, I'll go do it, and went out and got the gift cards and activated them. And these are intelligent people, but it's just the circumstances of what happened. So for this organization, or the individual who targeted this organization was so sophisticated to know that I'm going to represent myself as a CEO and go after brand new employees. That was a targeted attack that I haven't seen before, Stephen. What would you kind of call that kind of fraud? Is there a name for that?
So you have, well, there are different names for that, but it always starts with a spear phishing attack where someone is social engineering, right? It's a mixture of different attacks. And I can give you a concrete example. Again, I'm not trying to bore you with technical lingo. Give you a concrete example. Well, like you have is, I have a good friend, and he owns a small marketing agency. A very small marketing agency in downtown Toronto. And what they've noticed is that they paid, I think, a sum total of $70,000 or $75,000 to the accounts they were not supposed to use ever for payments. And the way it was done, it was so well socially engineered that the attackers knew everything about them, absolutely everything about every staff member. They knew their passwords, they knew their Facebook, they knew what they like, what they dislike, how they communicate by email, like the tone, and so everything about how they sign their emails and so on and so forth. And they created a very. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Can you still hear me?
Yep.
So what happened is that they were blown away, because they like, how could this happen, right? How can someone somewhere know all this stuff? And so when we looked at it closer, we kind of quickly realized that they just had an email, official administrative email user sitting in their infrastructure for months, watching what they send, where they send it, taking, intercepting emails, sending emails on their behalf, and so on and so forth. And the way that the person gained the entry is through phishing, through a phishing attack. Simple phishing attack that came from, it came from the United States. The email came from the United States, looked like legitimate email of legitimate domain. So for example, if our domain name is CCi, let's say CCi.com. And so the email that attackers made, and they actually made another website that's called CCi-net.com. And they've used GoDaddy, and I don't know if you're familiar with that. GoDaddy is a large internet domain registrar of registers, helps you register your domains, and they used their infrastructure, so GoDaddy's infrastructure, and they used GoDaddy's email infrastructure through Microsoft for that attack. So if you look at it, you'll say it's highly sophisticated, right? And it's hard to execute. And apparently it's not, right? It's being done every day, many times a day, only because, again, employees, like Brendan said, employees have a sense of urgency, and it's all circumstantial. So they ask to do something urgent. They think it's legitimate. So in that case, they knew the supplier's name. They said, you owe us $75,000, pay now, or we're not going to give you this venue. And guess what? They paid, right? Even though the account was a new account, because it looked so legitimate. So that's one of the key factors.
That's an excellent example, Steve. And I think we'll get into XDR and cyber insurance as we get into best practices moving forward. So I'm going to continue to move forward through the presentation, and we'll come back to a few items. We realize the importance of data currency right now and how important it is to protect data and leverage data to drive our businesses. And when we're doing that, the data volumes that we're producing are just growing at an absolutely explosive rate, but we're not necessarily keeping up on the protection side. We're creating new data, we're processing new data, the data complexity continues to grow, and it's harder for us to track how we're going to protect it. And that's why we need to start to put in new policies like XDR and have the proper security parameters put in place to protect that data. And that doesn't just mean having a good QA process. Cybersecurity and data protection goes so far past actually just having a QA environment to make sure that you've protected your solution that's going out there. And Steve can go into a little bit more detail on that. But as we continue to see our industry grow, every industry event you go to right now in Collision, everybody's talking about AI and generating data off AI and processing decisions. Well, what about the protection of that data? And what does that actually mean, AI? And so what we really need to start looking at is how are we going to track the risks of cyber threats? How are we going to prevent them? What do we do after one happens? And how do we properly communicate that? And Steve, maybe you want to go into a little bit detail about protecting data and what AI is bringing to the table, both to help data security, but also how it's also giving us increased risks based on the growing intelligence of AI.
Yeah, so AI, there's a lot of confusion also around AI, which stands for artificial intelligence, and the main one of the parts of the AI is called machine learning. So it's to have machine do something as if it was human. And to give you an example, when we as people, as humans, when we read newspaper, we don't actually read newspaper. We don't read every word. We piece it together. We scan it, right? We scan and we understand that. Computers cannot do that, really, right? It's a hard computer science problem. Because computer, if you take structured data where you're saying, okay, this field means first name, this means last name, it's easy. Computer understands that, right? But when it's unstructured, it does not. And so now, with the growth in the AI sector that was driven in the recent past by fintech in general, there are new technologies now that have been applied in cybersecurity and data protection. So, for example, Brandon mentioned XDR, meaning that we take in every source of data that we have out there and applying the same rules and listening to what's happening. And so intuitively, we can figure out very, very quickly what's going on at any given time and create some ongoing rules to learn and protect the information that is most valuable to us. So that's crucially important, like Brandon, like you mentioned.
So let's break down the data, because we were talking about it a little bit there in the two examples that you used, Steve. And there's two types of data when it comes to cybersecurity. There's PII information, which we're all aware of. And if we wanted to use a textbook definition, it's any data that can be used to identify a specific individual, and technology has expanded the scope of PII considerably. It can include IP addresses, login IDs, social media posts, or digital images. Geolocation, biometric, and behavioral data can also be classified as PII. And when we look at it as relative to the collision industry, it's all of our consumers' information or vehicle owner information. VIN can be PII, names of people can be PII. And what we typically see happen is with a lot of different solutions, we extract all of the data associated with a repair order. Well, really, as we start to think about best practices, we should only be pulling data points that we need, not just consume data because it's easy, but leverage data points that we have authorization to use, and more importantly, we actually need in order for our solution to work. So that comes into having a good data destruction process. So if you are going to pull it in, how do you get rid of data points that you don't need, and then certify that you're destroying that data or have a evolved solution that would just strip the data out at the shop end before it would even be sent. So you're actually only leveraging data points that you need. But then we also have newer solutions coming to the industry where we're producing what's called machine-to-machine information, as we have our spray booths talking to our tools and our tools speaking to our systems and our multiple systems within our collision center, like a paint scale or management system or estimating system, all connecting to one another. They're producing what's called machine-to-machine data. And so, Steve, I know you have a lot of experience with machine-to-machine data. How quickly is that growing, and how much more data are we producing through machine-to-machine rather than just PII information?
So the largest amount of data is produced machine to machine, and generally speaking, by the IoT devices, which is Internet of Things, right? So because all the machines, like if you think about it, all different systems now communicate, and the only thing they exchange is data. That's the currency they exchange, right? And so it grows exponentially, and even it led to, in the past, it led to the development of a new term called big data, right? Because the data sources there's so many data sources out there, and they're all desperate. So you have open data in the open, so you're talking about open web, where you can go and find it. You have data that's hidden behind user ID and password. You have data that's, you have to pay for to get access to. And so machine-to-machine exchange also means that there's a lot of information that is being generated in the format that we call a log, right? So we can understand, we can go back at any given time and understand, it's machine-to-machine language, but we need to understand what's being done and how it's being done. So there's a lot of that going on, and a lot of times where the privacy concerns come in is when people start having access to certain data that should only be accessible machine to machine or software to software. And so when we have those instances, that becomes problematic. And if you recall, I mentioned that you can have a data leak, not because it's intentional, but also unintentional. So that's where we have to pay more and more attention as to who needs to, again, boils down to access controls, better access controls. And because the information growth is exponential, and it will continue growing. So it's not going to slow down anytime soon.
So that's a good point, Steve. And to make it relative to more of the audience who's on the call, from collision center owners to SaaS organizations, insurance companies, and vehicle owners, our industry deals with both types of data. And we need to figure out what is the best way and practices to protect that data. Starting from an authorization agreement from the vehicle owner, just saying, yes, you can use my data for third-party services. As part of a repair authorization, we rarely see that captured in there, all the way to SaaS organizations in this industry mapping out their data tables to ensure if they ever had to delete a piece of information, how can they make sure it's removed from not only their tables, but any tables that are externally connected by other providers, because we are a connected industry sharing data. How do we make sure that if a customer does request that their information is deleted, that it's deleted everywhere? And that's something that we need to continue to sophisticate within this industry. And it's always boiled down to, well, who owns the data? Whose data is it? And our philosophy, and I think others share it, is it doesn't really matter anymore. We are custodians of the data. We all owe it to ourselves to protect the best interest of the data and who it may or may not represent, because we're all connected through it. And so that's really where we want to start to jump to, is what are solutions? We've talked about examples of data breaches, data cybersecurity, and what that all means, but how does it actually affect us? And so we went through this slide a little bit quickly in my last explanation, so I want to get through some best practices. And what we're hearing about more and more is GDPR. And that's really started to evolve from the European markets and coming over to North America. We are a little bit behind in comparison to what's going on in Europe. But Steve, maybe an overview, because you're very intimate with the GDPR policy through your experience. What is GDPR, and how might it impact this industry from the collision ecosystem perspective?
So the GDPR mostly built, it's a privacy legislation, European privacy legislation that protects, for the most part, protects the residents and citizens of European Union, and makes sure that their data could not be easily accessed or traded, or any violation could occur. And to give you an example, if you're talking machine-to-machine communication and GDPR, so generally what happens is that within the GDPR, you must design your systems a certain way. And the idea is that when one database has access to another database, and there is a person in the middle who can also access that idea is not acceptable for that exact reason, because people make mistakes, right? So data has to be encrypted and only accessible by a machine, and only for the purpose that it is intended to be accessed, right? Like not for any other purpose. And so basically there's also a term that is used in GDPR is data obfuscation, or what it basically means is that when we're trying to ensure that when someone looks at a data set, let's say my name and my phone number and my address and so on and so forth, which as Brendan mentioned, is personally identifiable information, that they don't see all components unless they really have to, right? Only machines sees those components in order to perform a function, right? In order to do something, to deliver a service to me, right? So if you look at storage also, in the past, a lot of large breaches involved data being stolen that's been sitting there for 15 years, as an example, personal data. And unless there's a reason to do so under GDPR, you're not allowed to do that. You're simply not allowed. You have to, like, unless it's a business requirement and that's the way you conduct your business, and it's an absolute must, you have to make sure that that information is only stored for a period of time when and if you need it, right? And then everyone has, and it's not only GDPR, it's also parallels somehow with the, not somehow, in many ways with the California privacy law, is that the private information that I gave you does not belong to you, it belongs to me. And so if I decide, for example, that I don't want you to have my information for any reason, I must have the authority and the ability to remove my information off your system. So that's what and Brendan said, we in North America, we're a little bit behind. I mean, Canadian PIPEDA, which is our privacy legislation, is a good legislation. It's well respected around the globe, and many countries actually used it as a foundation for their privacy laws. But again, GDPR went, several steps higher to protect the privacy of information of the citizens of the European Union.
So let's jump through it then. We've talked a little bit about setting up for what is cybersecurity and what does this industry need to do in order to protect ourselves and protect the rest of the industry. Steve mentioned hacking is now used to be done for fun, and now it's done for profit. And we want to make sure to figure out how we protect ourselves and continue to protect this industry. So we've been through a few different breaches, but one of the things that was a high-level breach within this industry, without naming the organization, was there was a software update that needed to be made by all employees at the organization, and none of the actual employees did the update. And what ended up happening is that led to the entry point for them to be breached and for data to be stolen. And so going back to one of the original pieces was, you can have all the great policies around data protection, but if your people don't follow it, then we're going to be in a lot of trouble here. And that was the case that happened with this organization here. It always comes down to the people within your organization and them following the policies. So let's look at it. We mentioned before breaches are going to happen, but readiness is a choice. And that's the biggest thing we want to leave everybody with today. And you'll look at the screen here, and this is the way Steve broke it down for me when we really started focusing on data security and what an organization can do. We can't stop a bank robbery from happening. It's going to happen. The robbers have decided they're going to come in. It's going to happen. So why would we fire the teller? Why would we get mad at the teller? Why would we hold them accountable for the actions of somebody else when really they didn't have a choice? Well, that's the same thing with cybersecurity and protecting our solutions. What we need to start looking at is we know that there are going to be breaches and bank robberies might happen. It comes down to, okay, we know there's going to be a breach. What are the timelines? What are we doing before? And what are we doing after? What policies did we put in place before to help protect ourselves so we would know what to do? And then how do we turn around and reduce the impact after a breach has happened? And Steve, this was your perfect example that you had used before. Maybe you can expand on some things that organizations can do before and after a breach may occur.
Of course. So we talking about what Brandon's talking about is pretty much incident readiness and response, right? So we know it will happen. We don't know when, but we know it will. So to protect our employees and our organization, first and foremost, we need to make sure that we as business leaders and our employees, they understand the consequences of their action and they understand policies and procedures, meaning that what they should and shouldn't do. However, it's really hard for someone who works, doesn't work in cybersecurity, doesn't work in IT, to understand why these policies need to be followed, right? It's because I said so, it doesn't work anymore. Because people going to make mistakes. And we all make mistakes. I make mistakes. You know, sometimes I look at email and I'm like, well, it looks legitimate. Of course, I'm not going to click I know better. I'm not going to click the link inside it. But sometimes I do open emails that, you know, they just look legitimate. So maybe it's something from Brendan. Maybe it's something else. So we need to make sure that our policies not only exist, but they can be enforced. So I don't believe in policies that are not backed by some sort of preventative controls. So for example, when we say to our employees, don't click the links, like if you somewhere and you see a link to the adult entertainment website, don't click that link because those sites can be malicious and dangerous. Well, it's good to say that, but you know, the curiosity always takes over. And more often than not, people are gonna do it and like, well, I'm not supposed to, but you know, there's no one here, no one's around, I'm gonna try and do that. So we need to put some preventive controls so that we don't blame the teller afterwards, right? So not saying, no, you didn't do it. We told you not to do it, but you did it anyways. And the way we do it is we put a control that, you know, at work or on computers that are being used for work-related activities, we have software, which, you know, today it's a common, very common software called endpoint protection that incorporates antivirus protection against different types of malware and protection against web threats. So that when it's configured properly, and again, I'm not talking about expensive $1 million systems. I'm talking about something that costs $50 a year, or maybe even less. And so those features have to be configured properly. They have to be configured in a way that protect our employees from the get-go. However, if something happened, then what we need to have, and it's a fancy term, is the incident management or incident response plan. And we need to test it. So we need to understand what we're going to do precisely when something happens. Not only we have to know and document what we're going to do, we need to figure out how to test it. So, for example, if you want to be good at anything, at golf or tennis or any sport, you need to do what? You need to practice, right? And the more you practice, the better you get. So it's the same thing. It needs to be treated like a sport, right? So we need to practice incident response. We need to make sure that our employees are involved, right? We can do it. It doesn't have to be, you know, cybersecurity training and incident response. They don't have to be boring. I mean, a lot of systems and a lot of companies that I know of, they use funny videos. They use cartoons and with customized cartoon characters to make sure that it looks more like a game and it's interesting, and you know, people have some laughs when they learn it, because that's what works best. So these two components, you know, good policies that are actually enforceable, and preventative controls to prevent something from happening, right? To help employee not to make a mistake, and then after, you know, breach happened, what do we do? How do we recover from it? And practicing it and practicing it and practicing it again. So that is the only way we're going to succeed.
So great point, Steve. One thing that I want to turn to is, and I'll send out the slides to everybody, of course, after, but in the interest of time, it's going to be the how. So we've given you examples of what could potentially happen. We've spoken about why you should protect different solutions, how you might be able to do it. But here's the depths of how you actually go and implement it. And depending on your business, it's not a huge investment. It's all relative to what you're trying to protect. And it starts with putting a framework in place. And what large organizations have ingrained in their solutions is starting to look at the Nist Framework, which is an organization that has a lot of different policies and practices and frameworks available free for businesses to go on and look at what type of business are you, what solutions do they recommend, and how might you go and implement it. And then of course there's always the ISO certifications. But Steve, this is more your bread and butter.
Yeah.
Why do you recommend these frameworks for businesses to be able to put in place to help protect them before and to figure out what to do after? Why would you recommend these two?
So they all, by the way, they correlated in many ways, right? So NIST stands for National Institute of Standards and Technology of the United States, and it's the most widely adopted cybersecurity framework. And we use the word framework because it doesn't have that one size fit all, right? Every organization, every industry is slightly different. So you take the best of what NIST has to offer and all the recommendations of different degrees of controls that it has, and you can apply it within your environment. Because not everything will apply to you, but it will make it very, very. It's, by the way, like Brendan, you hit the nail on the head. It's free, right? And it doesn't cost anything. You can download pretty much everything you need off of NIST website and work within your organization to protect your data better. And NIST, some of the best practices and some of the controls are also incorporated into the ISO, and also incorporated in what's called the C16 SOC 2 for organizations like CCi, as an example, right? The service organizations that provide software tools as a service. And in many cases, you guys probably heard of PCI DSS. Again, PCI DSS has many components and many controls that were developed as a part of NIST, right? So it's basically going to the mothership and saying, okay, so this is the framework. It's easy to understand what needs to be done. Very easy. It's very easy to assess myself as to where I stand, like performing, you know, very simple self-assessment. And here's what I need to do. And in the industry that we're in, I think it's very important to have a fine-grained and well-tailored framework that applies to what we do on a day-to-day basis.
So that makes perfect sense, Steve. And what I want to do is allow some time for questions if anybody has it. But the real question that we all need to start thinking about, and we use this at CCi all the time, we put how might we statements together when we want to accomplish a large task, but how might we fulfill our corporate and social responsibility as it relates to cybersecurity by making it fundamental in our respective business cultures, resulting in collaborative industry strength. We owe it to this industry and to our own businesses to hold ourselves to a certain standard to ensure that if there is an incident that is not impacting everybody or people aren't acting in a reckless manner, that's going to jeopardize this ecosystem of SaaS organizations operating in the collision industry. And we can implement all the frameworks we want, policies, and say we're following these guidelines, but ultimately it starts with the people. It's not the technology that's the risk. It's always the people in following those processes. And that's why we made reference in the very beginning. We know how to prevent fires. We know not to leave matches lying around. We have to start to take that same approach with data security and our technology solutions. How do we prevent cybersecurity attacks? How do we ensure we have best data practices in place? And what do we do after when we know a breach might come about and actually take place? What's our response? And so we like to leave it off there. I know we're kind of cutting it short on time. I have left our information on the screen here. If anybody has any additional questions they would like to follow up, I know this is being recorded, but I do want to take the time to thank CIECA, because with CIECA putting this together, they're continuing to raise the bar of what the standard is for this industry. And that's why we're honored to be a part of it and be able to present best practices so we continue to raise the bar for this industry. But Paul, I will turn it back over to you if there's any questions that we want to go through. And again, apologies to everybody for going right up to the end of it and maybe cutting some questions off. We'd be more than happy to get back to you.
Great. Thank you, Brandon, Steve. Stacy Phillips, CIECA's Marketing Director, has been monitoring the webinar. Stacy, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do. Thanks. And thanks, Brandon and Steve, for sharing great information today. We have a couple of questions. One is, where can I find out more about timing for the different regulations that you mentioned?
The timing in terms of sorry, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Brandon.
Probably timing of when new regulations are going to come in that might impact this industry, Steve. Where would somebody stay up to date on information?
So the best, yeah, I'm sorry. So one of the best sources is if you go to the website, the Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, or Privacy Commissioner of Canada, the federal, they have a lot of information as to what's going on, and I believe you can sign up for a newsletter, and you can do the same with the European Commission website. And so when anything that parallels anything that relates to the industry, you're going to read it in the newsletter, and you're going to see it firsthand, because a lot of changes are not implemented sporadically without any consultations with the industry leaders, right? Like it goes hand in hand. So
Steve, what we could
websites, yeah.
Steve, maybe we could provide those links to this group after, Stacy, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes,
that would be helpful. Yes, thank you.
We absolutely can. Yes.
Thank you. And what alternatives do you see outside of biometrics and authenticator apps that would become a standard?
Well, it's hard to tell. So there are a lot of different technologies out there. The passwordless, and there's one-time authentication code, and authenticator apps, and dual authentication. And there's no, I don't see any clear. A lot of banks use biometrics, right? Banks like using biometrics, for example, for business banking. So that identifies software on your phone, identifies your face, and identifies your voice. So I think it's one of the best ways of doing that. However, biometrics have been broken before. So there is a way to bypass that. There is a hard way that it's not easy, but there is a way to bypass two-factor authentication too. So I think the future isn't as clear, but I know that a lot of companies and a lot of smart people are working on coming up with great solutions in the next few years.
Great, thank you. That's all of our questions for now, but if you could please provide that information, we'll make sure to pass it along to our attendees.
Great.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you both very much. I'd like to thank Brandon Laur and Steve Driz for sharing this information. This presentation has been recorded and will be available later today at CIECA.com. I would like to invite you to check CIECA.com for a schedule of future broadcasts and to watch recordings of past webinars. Links will be available under the CIECAST tab at the top of the page. CIECA has partnered with the Automotive Management Institute. Attendees of this webinar are eligible to receive credit towards a professional designation from AMI after taking a short quiz on its website. A link will be sent to all attendees. And please follow CIECA's social media platforms to stay up to date on upcoming events and news. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, guys.
Take care.